Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new malicious compliance content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
First one is titled, Absolutely Mr. Neighbor. I have a neighbor who is a bit of a troublemaker. A bit of a backstory, he has 4 cars and often parks them all on the street, completely filling the street in front of his and my house. When he isn't working on his car, with air wrenches, or washing them, he is probably idling his tow truck. Oh yeah, he has a tow truck too, just rumbling away outside of my house. People are constantly coming and going from his house, likely for illicit reasons, but no way to prove that. There was a period where the police were at his house multiple times a week about 2 years ago, but that has subsided to once every couple months. He lives with his grandmother, who is immobile, and you no longer see her anymore except when the ambulance comes and takes her to the hospital, alone. Last week when I was walking out of my house to take my son to daycare, he came stomping across the street and started to be all buddy-buddy with me, so I immediately knew something was up. He asked if we can keep my dog, a German Shepherd, inside in the morning until 7 a.m. because he is tired of her waking him up. She is a shepherd, she barks, we limit it as best we can, but a dog is going to dog. I say sure, and continue buckling in my kid. He then continues on and says to not take pictures of him or his house. I point to the camera overhead, which is oriented in a way to see my front door, driveway, and his house. I put it up to keep an eye on him and my property since he has a hot head and I don't trust him to not do something stupid. Then to take the cake, he told me to stop following his wife, and explained that she said I followed her home multiple times. I explained to him that I lived across the street, from time to time we will both be coming home at the same time, and that I have better things to do than park a mile away from home to follow her home. So, for the malicious compliance, it comes back to keeping my dog inside until 7 a.m. so he can get his much-needed beauty sleep. Now, instead of leaving her dog door unlocked at night, and her going out in the morning when she wakes up, usually around when we wake up at 6:30 a.m., we lock it at night and unlock it on the nose at 7 a.m. But, at 7 a.m. when I let her out, I tell her to speak for about 5 minutes. More often than not she'd go out in the morning, pee, and come back in with no one any the wiser. Not anymore, now she goes out and barks up a storm for a few minutes. Woof woof woof. Edit. For future readers who still think my neighbor is a saint. The cops were called on him yesterday for threatening to run over the kids who play basketball in the street because their ball rolls on his yard sometimes. Next one is titled, Yes, I have a cell phone. No, you cannot reach me on it. I had a pretty good tech support job in the late 90s at a cool place to work. Since we had an on-call rotation, we had some nice perks. The company paid for a second phone line, yeah, dial-up modems were still the thing. They also paid up to $X a month towards a cell phone or provided a company cell phone. The only constant thing is change. The company was bought up by a large conglomerate. As the Borg assimilated us, they announced that they would no longer pay for personal cell phones and company ones would only be given to those at the manager level or above. As an aside, how stupid is that? Determine who gets a tool by status, rather than the usefulness of the tool to the job. The rationale was that everyone has a cell phone nowadays, and incidental use for company business should not be a burden. We grumbled, but it was still a cool place to work, so most people went along. Most people, but not Bob. At first, when they collected everyone's contact number, meaning personal cell phone number, Bob gave them his desk phone number. Of course, emergency calls after hours went to voicemail. Typically, the operations center would call his home number next and usually get him. It took them a couple of on-call rotations to figure out that they didn't have his cell number. After a round of emails asking for it was ignored, he was summoned into the director's office and asked for it. He explained why he felt it was unfair that the company used his asset without reimbursement. He was told it would only be used for emergency, incidental use, and was a condition of employment. He reluctantly gave it up. Then came the malicious part. Cell phones were pretty basic at that time. Talk and text, really simple games. Most of the smarts were in the network. Bob found for an extra $2 per month, his phone line could block callers or send them directly to voicemail. Bob paid the $2 and set the company's outbound caller ID number to go directly to voicemail. When Bob was not on call, he turned off the audio alert for voicemail, and the only indication was a little envelope icon on the phone's 1.5 screen. On call, he got the alert, but only called back if he was away from home. Otherwise, he waited for the call on his landline. He said it was the best $2 a month he had spent. I left a year later, and Bob was still enjoying his cell phone on his terms. Last one is titled, "Sorry, I can't run your errands, I'm grounded." Before you start, know that this is way longer than I expected. I tried to summarize as much as possible, but there are a lot of relevant details. Before deciding if you want to read, this is my perspective of an incident when I was a teenager where my parent very much regretted grounding me. So, this was back in the early 2000s, I was 17 and had very interesting parents, at least, my psychologists have said so. I got my license on my 16th birthday and became responsible for many of my parents' house management responsibilities. I dropped off bill payments, before online payments were a thing. You had to drive to their offices if you didn't mail the checks in time, did the grocery shopping, and taxied my sibling to school and doctor appointments and friends' houses. I was completely on board as I loved driving and I'd always get an extra couple bucks in gas money. But I also spent the previous year homeschooling so I could commute to my mother's company an hour away and work for 40 hours a week for free, so any freedom I got was like scraps at a starving dog. At that point, I pretty much was an adult, but was allowed to go to public school my senior year and reconnect with my old friends from grade school. It was kinda like being half teen, half adult with the entitlement of a teenager who thinks they're an adult. My family's dynamic was interesting to say the least. I was the oldest, and my younger sister was the obvious favorite. Each developmental milestone was met with resistance, and as I grew into new interests like makeup, music, and social activities, my parents insisted on getting the same things for both of us and giving us the same freedoms at the same time. She was 3 years younger. But, the rules were strict for me, but never enforced for her. I wasn't allowed to date till I was 18. She was allowed to date at 14. They also brought her shopping all the time, but I was the responsible one, so they signed me up for free work with their social group to increase their social standing. My sister never had to work, but, "We're so proud of you. You're the only child we can trust with the credit card." Yeah, because I've been contributing to this household since I was 14, it's called child labor. I counted the days till I'd be free of my family, but while I was stuck, I found ways to have fun and I had a lot of friends. At 17, I was randomly given a curfew. I never actually had a curfew until that month and was used to being out until 2 or 3 a.m. But in their words, "You're going to be home by 10 p.m. every night because you keep coming in late and waking us up when you brush your teeth." Yeah, neglect is kind of funny when you look back on it. I especially loved that I was a teen who still brushed her teeth every day and it inconvenienced my parents enough to notice me. An additional background tidbit is that my younger sister had been caught with pot in our evangelical Christian family's home. She was in the most trouble she'd ever seen, 1 month grounded, but they let her off the hook after 2 weeks. This occurred the month before the following story. So within a month of my new curfew, I was 5 minutes late getting home. I didn't rush home. I figured it wasn't a big deal. After all, I made their house run and I actually never got in trouble because aside from brushing my teeth too late, I pretty much was an adult with adult responsibilities. I could literally ask my mom to call me in sick for school because I didn't feel like going, and she would. Boy was I wrong, they went nuclear. I was screamed at for an hour and grounded for 2 weeks from the car. Well, growing up in that house, it kind of rolled off my back, lol. but I was pretty angry that my punishment for being 5 minutes late was equal to my sister's punishment for storing and smoking drugs in our house. I also knew that my parents were about to regret this punishment. I have quite the mean streak when I'm pushed, and I'm ashamed to admit, I loved torturing them at every opportunity. I know they were expecting me to beg for the car and apologize, but I did not. I knew exactly what was coming and how little they thought this one through. There's a phrase, don't kill the golden goose. Well, when your entire household runs on the shoulders of a 17-year-old, you've made some bad life choices. Especially when that 17-year-old is as smart and reliable as the adults are supposed to be. The next day, yes, the very next day, my mother comes into my room and asks me to drop off a bill she forgot to mail. This isn't word for word, but the gist. Mom, I have to meet with a client and don't have time. I need you to run this to local utility company. Yes, she never asks, she demands. Me. Looking up from my book. Sorry, I'm grounded. Mom. Well, we'll make an exception. Me. No, because then I'll never learn to not be 5 minutes late for curfew. Yes, my smartassness was the main reason I wasn't the favorite child, as they explained to me many times. I apparently had an attitude problem from the age of 4. Mom. Well, I really need to you take this to local utility. If you don't, we'll have to pay a late fee. Me. Well, if I'm grounded from the car, I'm grounded from the car. I won't be doing any errands until it's over. She huffed off, realizing her mistake. I never followed up with how that one turned out for her. Over the next week, I started acting like a normal teenager. I walked to my friends' houses. I was only grounded from the car. Would call my parents when I needed a ride home. Lol, that was my favorite. I can't be late for curfew and you don't want me walking home in the dark. I actually walked so much and so far that my thighs were rock hard at the end of that week. During that week, my parents looked a mess. They had to drive my sister everywhere and learned how exhausting it really was. They had to actually plan their errands and watch their own kids. I was on vacation. During that week, the requests went from, we'll make an exception, to, we never meant you couldn't run errands, to, these errands are the only reason we let you drive that car, to, please, just this once, we only grounded you because we love you, to, you're so ungrateful, you're supposed to be the responsible one. Basically, the whole gambit of manipulation. At this point, I'm gaslight-proof and I had actively hated my mom for over 3 years. I was enjoying myself so much that I sometimes wonder why I enjoyed being a psychopath to her when I'm actually not one at all. I have diagnostic proof that I'm not a psychopath, lol. By the end of the first week, I was called out to have a talk with them. My mother was the tougher of the two. My dad was pretty cool, but always sided with her. Mom. We've decided you've learned your lesson. We're letting you off your punishment early, but you have to start running your errands again and driving your siblings. Me. No, I'm good with the current system. Mom. I insist, we don't have time to run errands. Me. Smiling because finally, well, maybe you should have thought about that before you took away my car. Mom. Well, if you don't run the errands, you can't have the car back. Me. Fine with me. I walked out of the room like a proud peacock. After the 2 weeks were up, they assumed I'd be back to normal. Nope. I basically told them that I'd rather walk as the number of responsibilities far outweighed the benefits of driving. They were not happy, but what could they really do? They lasted 1 more week. I went carless for a total of 3 weeks. Finally, my mom broke down and did the unthinkable. She begged. Well, the words were begging, the tone was sucking up, but I truly enjoyed it. It took all my energy not to beam with self-pride. Now, my mother was a saleswoman. She had been inadvertently training me for years. In that moment I opened negotiations. In the end, I got an extra $10 a week in gas money on top of the $3 here or there for unscheduled errands. I still had the curfew, but I got a few minutes grace period from then on. They never even dared to threaten to take my car or license away again. But the cherry on top, my sister's personal taxi service was closed. Apparently, she treated them the same way she treated me during her frequent and unnecessary rides, and from then on, she had to be nice if she wanted a ride. There were a few incidences where she tried to get my parents to force me to take her or tell her where I was going, but they didn't. They knew better than to kill their golden goose of home management, and for the rest of the year, I finally had a great childhood because I was left alone on my own terms. Thanks for listening.